Hello, so I'm Olivia Haas, the Director of Strategic Communications and Research with the National Coalition of Girls' Schools. For nearly 25 years, the National Coalition of Girls' Schools has been the leading advocate for girls' education, with the distinct commitment to the transformative power of all girls' schools. Our coalition consists of 200 girls' schools throughout North America and beyond, and exists to provide professional development, advocacy, networking opportunities, and research. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Rick Holmgren, who is Vice President for Information Services and Assessment and Chief Information Officer at Allegheny College. And we're going to speak today about a report that he authored for NCGS titled Steeped in Learning, the Student Experience at All Girls Schools. This report is an executive summary of the High School Survey of Student Engagement, also known as HSSSE. Rick was commissioned by the National Coalition of Girls Schools to analyze the survey results. Administered by the Center for Evaluation and Education Policy at Indiana University, HSSSE explores facets of students' attitudes, behaviors, and school experiences that are known to affect learning. So Rick's report compares the experiences of girls at all girls schools with that of girls enrolled in co-ed institutions. So thank you, Rick, for joining me today.
Thanks, Olivia. Appreciate the introduction.
Absolutely. I would love to hear from you, from your analysis of the girls' schools. What findings do you think were the most significant and why?
Well, I have to say the first thing when you shared with me the results from the collection of schools that had participated in HSSSE, and I think one of the first things I said to you when we talked about this on the phone was that I kind of wished I'd sent my daughter to an all-girls school. It was really the data are terrific, and these are something that you should be celebrating as an organization, and your schools should be celebrating if they can have if they have these kind of results at their institution, right? They might not be like the other girls' schools, so that's reason to do it themselves, find out if they're, performing like their peers. But those kind of results, as a parent, I just well, this is the kind of experience I would want my daughter to have. And so that's a wonderful, it's a wonderful set of data. There weren't any areas that I can remember where I said, wow, that's a concern for me. I would want to dig into that if I was managing a school, right? So the differences were really significant compared to the experience of girls in the public schools. You could really see a difference there. Mm-hmm. And in the report that I put together, if I say there's a difference between, like, say, the private co-ed schools and the NCGS schools, then that difference is statistically significant. But in some cases, it's really small. Like the difference between 94% having a positive experience and 95.5%, one might argue that's really not significant in a practical way, right? So you have to, significance is one of those odd bits. You have to really look at it and say, are we seeing the kinds of experiences that we would want our students to have? Are we comfortable with what the kinds of numbers that are coming out of the instrument? And I think that, again, I looked at the data from a collection of schools, so I don't know what any individual school's results were like.
Right.
But if an individual schools were like the collections, there's a lot there for them to be proud of and for them, to share with their communities. And I think that's in and of itself is a valuable thing to have. And there are particular areas of interest too. For example, the questions around safety. Does the girl feel safe in her school? Mm-hmm. Right now, that's an area where the girls in the all-girls schools said yes, they did at a higher rate than it was both what I would call practically different from the private schools, in addition to statistically significant. Right? Okay. There was a real practical difference in that they do feel safer. They feel more able to speak their voices in class. They feel like their opinions are being respected, and so those are important differences that we might highlight. Or if I was trying to market a school, I might highlight that in talking about the school. So that's the kind of thing that stands out to me, because as an educator, I know that it's really important that we feel empowered to speak in the classroom. That's a really important outcome, and something if I was looking at this as a school administrator, I'd be saying, how many of our students feel empowered to speak out in the classroom? I think that's great. The girls at all girls schools report a very high level of learning in terms of learning to write well, speak well, critical thinking. That's good. They're feeling, so again, there's a sense of empowerment that comes from that. You have to be a little careful. You can't say that they actually did learn how to write better. That our own self-reported gains on learning are always a little suspect when you're doing this kind of assessment, but it does speak to their sense of confidence. They're coming out of those classes ready to. They're clearly one of the other things we looked at was what are their career goals. These are definitely girls who are ready to go out there and change the world, and they're coming out of these schools with the attitude that they're prepared to do that. And so those are great findings. On the whole, when you take the whole thing as a package, what you're seeing is a really rich environment. You're seeing girls that are feeling empowered to kind of go out and learn and to change things, and that's a wonderful thing for the girls, and for us as a society too. I would say those are great findings. Your school should be proud of their results. So.
Terrific, thank you. So you touched on this. I just wondered if you could just sort of explain it a little bit further, because I've had the pleasure of reading the report. And to a lay reader, as you said, some of the percentages might seem a little bit small, the differences.
Yeah.
So can you speak to me a little bit more about what is considered statistically significant or not, when we're looking at these girls' schools versus the co-ed schools?
Well, this is one of these things whenever you're looking at statistics and you see a difference in averages for something, and what we looked at in the report was the frequency with which we got particular responses, how often a girl might say they engaged in classroom discussion very often or seldom or never or something like that, right? So which frequency, different responses. And so whenever you're looking at statistics like that, if you see a difference, one of the questions you want to know is this difference statistically significant in that if I did a different sample, would I still see that difference, or maybe it had something to do with the sampling or the way the test was run? There's no real difference there. It just shows up. And in some cases, when you have small samples, and you might find this at some of your smaller schools, that there aren't enough respondents to a particular item, so that if you only have 25 respondents and one person changes their mind, that's 4%, right? So that might look like a big difference, but if it's not, it won't show up as statistically significant if that difference could be just due to chance or because one girl was sick that day and didn't fill out the form, right? So we got a different response. And this report, the data set was large enough that fairly small differences were statistically significant, but that doesn't always mean the difference matters, right? So when you interpret, you want to know it's a real difference if it's statistically significant, but when you interpret it, you want to ask, is it worth really trying to push this as being really a different experience for girls if it's 94 versus 95%? Probably not, right? I'd have a hard time saying that's really a practical difference.
Right.
And so that's where you really want to look at those things. But going back to, I think this is in the notes in the report as well, if the difference is indicated as being, if we say there's a difference between two populations on an item, and not every case do we say there's a difference. Some cases you can't distinguish between girls at a private school, private all-girls school, and a co-ed school on a few of the items. And there we don't claim that. So if we don't claim that, it doesn't exist, right?
Right.
Another way to say that. In those cases where we do claim a difference, there's a reason to believe that there's a real difference there, but it might be really tiny, right? So you just recognize that's not always practical, right?
Understood. Well, thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
So as a communications professional, which is my background, I see an endless number of ways that this data can be used by our member schools. Now that our members have access to the report, I would love to hear a little bit from you on how you would recommend our schools use this resource.
Well, I think it's really important for us, I mentioned this a bit earlier, for a school to think about one way to do this, say, in a faculty development workshop. You might pick a few items that are closely aligned. If I was running a school or a workshop for a school, I might work with the administrators and say, what are the important things that you would want your students to say on this particular item that you say you'd want a lot of students to say this happens a lot, or that this is a really important attribute of the school. And so I might pick out some of those, and then I would go into the workshop and I would ask faculty to say, if I were to give this to students in your classroom, what do you think they would say? And have them, kind of figure out, try and guess what the girls had said. So it engages and gets them thinking about, what do I think the experience is like in the classroom? And then you can show them the results. And especially if there's a difference, you can say, why is there a difference here? Why are we seeing something happening? So it creates that opportunity. And that's part of what we can do with tools like this, is to say, because as a teacher, I taught for many years. As a teacher, I know there were days when I taught calculus, and I thought I was crystal clear. And then at the end, my students were like, what were you talking about? Right? Because I come at this from a different perspective than the students do. And so there's what the real opportunity with data like this is, we think we know what the experience of the girls is like. So let's think about, what do we think is happening? What does the data tell us is really going on? And if it's not aligned, should we be doing something different? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of conversations that are there. The other question that, again, picking a question I mentioned earlier, a large percentage of the girls at NCGS schools say they feel safe in their school. There's a small group that doesn't say that. So we might ask ourselves, are we okay with the fact, and I don't remember the percentage now, the group of girls that many girls saying they don't feel safe? Or do we want to think more about what creates that feeling of safety? Why would someone not report feeling safe in their school, right? So that's the other side of this. Provides opportunity in any, even if you have 25, or excuse me, 75% getting the response you want, that means 25% are not. So we tend to often celebrate those successes, and that's good. And sometimes that's good in our marketing, that's helpful. But we also, as people who are trying to create the best experience for every student, we want to ask, what about those other kids? Especially, and you can, in the data, if it's reported the way that I think it is, you should be, as an administrator, be able to go in and see, okay, if they don't feel safe, what else do they not? What are there other places where they're not having the experience we want? Are there girls who don't say who never speak in class, who don't write anything, who don't feel challenged, right? Who are disengaged? Is there a pattern of disengagement, or is it just one or two items? Or is it maybe they filled in the wrong bubble? That happens too sometimes, right? So,
Sure.
You want to look at the whole picture and kind of pull that out of the data. So there's a lot you can do with this once you start getting in there and start really pulling it apart. So.
Right. So the report, as it is right now, as I said, we really focused on these areas where there is statistical significance with differences. And so from a communications perspective, the ways that I see the data being used would be by our school heads and principals and admissions offices and advancement offices. Again, my background is thinking of how, heads and principals can use this statistics in their speeches and correspondence to current families, admissions renewal letters, remind your existing families,
Right.
the benefit that their daughters are getting at your school. I think the data is fantastic for admissions publications, school websites, to help make the case for the benefits
Right.
of girls' schools. It's also, I think, a great fundraising tool for current and prospective donors. I mean, I could see some of these statistics being used in grant applications, if you're having to make the case from a fundraising perspective. I would love to see communications directors use the data to draft op-eds, to make the case for the value and the place for girls' schools in today's society.
Mm-hmm.
And I even think that I could see the stats being used by alumni. It'd make it kind of fun to share some of these statistics in alumni relations magazines. It never hurts to remind your alumni of their great experience and what they took away from that. Annual giving asks, things like that. So, these obviously are a lot of advocacy uses. You're coming, from the administrator, educator side in terms of how can the data be used by our schools to drive change, institutional change, improve the student learning experience. So what we have done here at NCGS is invited you to come to our conference in June so that schools who are interested in diving deeper into the report and into the results to learn how to use HSSE to drive institutional change can come and meet with you and experience a pre-conference workshop. So that would be our June 2015 NCGS conference, From STEM to STEAM, Girls Schools Leading the Way. So not to put you on the spot, but
Yes.
I think you're going to be able to join us, right?
I expect to be able to be there, and I would enjoy actually doing that work. And I particularly like I'm very deeply invested in student learning, and so if I can talk with people who are interested in figuring out ways to do that better, and the data can really be helpful in helping us understand where we can make the best. We all have limited resources. Where can we best invest those resources to really get the maximal gain? And so there are great things we can do with that. So I would encourage, if people are interested, I'd be happy to speak with them about those kinds of things.
Terrific, terrific. Well, we'll work on getting that planned. So thank you.
All right.
So let me just wrap up real quickly by sharing with everyone that if you're interested in receiving individual copies of this report, that you can contact the coalition offices at ncgs@ncgs.org. And multiple copies are also available for sale to NCGS member schools as well as non-member schools via our publication order form on our website, which is ncgs.org. So thank you so much, Rick, for your time today and for joining me. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye now.